The massive alien ships appeared in space like giant metal beasts blocking out the stars. Their dark hulls stretched for miles, covered in strange, glowing symbols that hurt human eyes to look at. These were the warships of the Galactic Council, and they had just crossed into the Sol system for the first time in 300 years. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of Earth's defense station, Alpha 7, watching the sensor readings with growing dread. The numbers didn't lie. Over 2,000 Council ships had just emerged from hyperspace at the edge of their solar system. Each one was bigger than anything humans had ever built. "How many?" asked Commander Jake Morrison, his voice tight with worry. "Too many," Maria replied, her hands gripping the rail until her knuckles turned white. "Send word to Earth Command immediately. Tell them the Council has crossed the frontier." The frontier, that invisible line in space that had kept humanity trapped in their own solar system for 3 centuries. When aliens first made contact with Earth, they had seemed friendly at first. They shared some technology, taught humans about the galaxy, and welcomed them to join the great community of spacefaring races. But then the tests began. The Council wanted to study human behavior, human psychology, human reactions to different situations. What they found terrified them. Humans were too violent, they said, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed to spread across the galaxy. So they built the frontier, an invisible prison made of energy fields and monitoring stations that kept humanity locked inside their own solar system. Any human ship that tried to cross the line was destroyed without warning. Any message sent beyond the frontier was blocked. For 300 years, humans had lived like prisoners in their own home. Now the guards had come inside the cage. Ambassador Zeth Ka stood on the bridge of the Council flagship Divine Authority. His 4 purple eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he looked at the primitive human defense stations scattered around their system. Such tiny, weak things compared to Council technology. Zeth Ka belonged to the hegemony race, tall, blue-skinned beings who considered themselves the most civilized species in the galaxy. His people had helped create the Council and had always been its strongest supporters. They believed in order, in rules, in keeping dangerous species under control, and humans were the most dangerous species they had ever encountered. "Open a communication channel to the human homeworld," Zeth Ka commanded. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been denied anything in his long life. The message reached Earth within minutes. In the emergency bunker deep beneath Geneva, President Chen Wei and his advisors gathered around a large screen to hear what the aliens had to say. Zeth Ka's image appeared on the screen, his alien features cold and emotionless. When he spoke, his words were translated by the computer into perfect English, but the tone remained harsh and commanding. "Humans of Earth," he began, "the Galactic Council has become aware of your illegal activities. Our sensors have detected dimensional manipulation experiments in your system. This technology is forbidden to species under containment protocols." President Chen felt his blood turn cold. The Prometheus project was supposed to be secret. How had they found out? Furthermore, Zeth Ka continued, long-range scans show military buildup beyond acceptable levels for a contained species. You have 48 hours to comply with the following demands. First, surrender all research data on dimensional manipulation technology. Second, dismantle your military forces down to basic defense levels. Third, accept direct Council governance over your species. The alien paused, letting his words sink in. Around the conference table, human leaders felt anger building in their chests like fire. "If you refuse to comply," Zeth Ka said, his 4 eyes glowing brighter, "the Council fleet will reduce your military installations to ash. We will then occupy your planet and impose order by force. You have 48 hours to decide." The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence in the bunker was so complete that Chen could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, General Martinez slammed his fist on the metal table, making everyone jump. 300 years, he shouted. 300 years they keep us locked up like animals in a zoo. And now they want to make us slaves. Dr. Sarah Okafor, head of the Prometheus project, pushed her glasses up her nose. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She was shaking with rage. "They want our dimensional research because they know what it means," she said quietly. "For the first time in 3 centuries, we've developed something that could let us escape their cage. Something that scares them." Chen looked around the table at the faces of Earth's greatest minds and leaders. He saw anger, fear, frustration, and something else, something that made him nervous. He saw people who had finally reached their breaking point. "What are our options?" Chen asked. Defense Minister Kim spoke first. "Militarily, we have no chance. Their fleet could destroy every defense station we have in an hour. Our ships are toys compared to theirs." "What about the Prometheus technology?" Chen asked Dr. Okafor. The scientist was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. "The dimensional folding technology works," she said slowly. "We can create spaces that exist outside normal reality. Hide things, move things instantly across vast distances. The Council knows this could change everything." "Could we hide our fleet?" asked Admiral Torres. "We already have," Dr. Okafor replied. "The ships we've been building aren't in normal space. They're folded away where Council sensors can't detect them." Chen felt a chill run down his spine. "How many ships?" "Enough," the doctor said simply. General Martinez leaned forward. "What else can this technology do?" Dr. Okafor was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "General, when you fold space, sometimes you fold it into places that already exist. Places where other things live. Other things. Things that are old. Things that are hungry. Things that have been waiting for someone to open a door." The room fell silent again. Chen could see the wheels turning in everyone's minds. After 300 years of being treated like dangerous animals, humanity was finally being given a choice: surrender and become slaves, or fight back with weapons that might destroy them all. "Recommendations?" Chen asked. Dr. Okafor stood up slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Chen take a step back. "Mr. President," she said, "the Council has spent 3 centuries telling the galaxy that humans are too dangerous to be allowed freedom. They've kept us caged because they're afraid of what we might become if we're pushed too far." She paused, looking around the room at the assembled leaders of humanity. "I recommend we show them they were right to be afraid." Outside the bunker, across Earth and throughout the solar system, something was changing. In military bases and research facilities, in space stations and underground labs, humans were making the same decision that their leaders were making. The cage had been their prison for 300 years. Now it was about to become the galaxy's nightmare. The 48-hour countdown had begun. Something changed in humanity during those first 24 hours. It started small, in research labs and military bases around the world. Scientists who had spent their careers following careful safety rules suddenly began working on projects that would have horrified them just days before. Soldiers who had trained for defensive missions started planning attacks that broke every rule of civilized warfare. Dr. Sarah Okafor stood in the main laboratory of the Prometheus project, watching her team work with an intensity she had never seen before. Her assistant, Dr. James Park, was modifying the dimensional folding equations with changes that should have taken months to calculate. Instead, he was doing it in hours, as if the math was flowing directly from his mind to the computer. "Dr. Park," she called out, "show me what you're working on." The young scientist looked up, and Sarah felt a chill when she saw his eyes. They were bright with excitement, but there was something else there. Something that looked almost like madness. "I've been thinking about weaponizing the fold drives," he said, his words coming fast and excited. "What if we don't just fold space for travel? What if we fold space around enemy ships, compress them into nothing, or fold them into the space between dimensions where those things live?" Sarah should have been horrified. The idea of using their peaceful research for such terrible purposes should have made her sick. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Show me the calculations," she said. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out. In the military command center beneath Colorado, General Martinez was looking at battle plans that his staff had created overnight. Plans that involved tactics no human military had ever considered before. "Sir," said Colonel Adams, pointing at a holographic display, "we've identified 17 different ways to use the folded space technology against the Council fleet. We can hide bombs in dimensional pockets and explode them inside their ships. We can create gravity wells that will crush their hulls. We can even fold their own weapons back at them." Martinez studied the plans. Each one was more destructive than the last. Each one involved technology that could kill millions if used wrongly. "How long to implement?" he asked. "The teams are already working on it." Sir, Dr. Okafor's people are manufacturing the devices now. Good, Martinez said, and meant it. In the orbital shipyards hidden in folded space, Admiral Sarah Chen looked out at humanity's secret fleet. For decades, they had been building ships in spaces that didn't technically exist, using resources gathered from asteroids that were folded out of normal reality. The ships were not like anything the Council had ever seen. They were built for one purpose: war against enemies with superior technology. Every weapon, every defense system, every piece of equipment had been designed by humans who knew they would only get one chance to fight back. "Status report," Admiral Chen ordered. "Fleet is ready." "Admiral," replied Captain Thompson. "We have 300 ships fully operational. Each one is equipped with dimensional fold drives, reality warping weapons, and AI systems that—" "Well, Admiral, the AI systems are something new." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Thompson looked uncomfortable. "The computer scientists have been working with some of Dr. Okafor's dimensional research. They've created AI programs that exist partially in folded space. The AIs can think faster than anything we've ever built. But they're also different. They think in ways that aren't quite human anymore." Sarah should have been concerned about AIs that thought in inhuman ways. Instead, she found herself smiling. "Perfect," she said. "We're not fighting a human war anymore." Back on Earth, President Chen Wei walked through the streets of Geneva late at night, trying to understand what was happening to his people. Everywhere he looked, he saw changes that disturbed him. Children who should have been in school were instead at military recruitment centers, begging to join the fight. Scientists who had spent their lives creating medicine were now working on biological weapons. Artists were painting pictures of alien ships burning in space. But the most disturbing change was in people's faces. The fear was gone. For 300 years, humans had lived with the knowledge that they were prisoners, that powerful aliens controlled their fate. That fear had shaped their society, made them careful and cautious. Now the fear was replaced by something else, something that looked like hunger. Chen stopped at a news broadcast playing on a public screen. The reporter was a woman he had known for years, someone who had always been calm and professional. Now she spoke with barely controlled excitement about humanity's destiny among the stars and the cleansing fire that would purify the galaxy. When she finished the report, she looked directly into the camera with eyes that gleamed with an intensity that made Chen step backward. "The aliens want to see monsters," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Let's show them what real monsters look like." In the deep research levels beneath the Prometheus facility, Dr. Okafor made a discovery that changed everything. She was testing a new dimensional fold when the sensors detected something impossible: structures in the space between dimensions. "Vast, ancient, and completely alien. Dr. Park," she called. "Look at this." James Park ran over to her station and stared at the readings. What they were seeing shouldn't exist. The empty space between dimensions was supposed to be exactly that. Empty. "Are those buildings?" he asked. "Structures of some kind," Sarah replied. "But look at the age readings. These things are older than the galaxy itself." As they watched, one of the structures seemed to notice their observation. Something moved within it, something enormous and alien beyond description. "It's looking at us," James whispered. Sarah felt something touch her mind. Not painful, but foreign and ancient and hungry. Through the dimensional fold, she could sense vast intelligence, older than stars, that had been waiting in the spaces between realities for eons, waiting for someone to open a door. "They've been trapped," she said, understanding flooding through her. "These beings exist in the spaces between dimensions, but they can't break through on their own. Our technology isn't just folding space. It's creating doorways. Should we close the connection?" James asked, but his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah looked at the readings again. These entities were powerful beyond imagination, dangerous beyond measure. The Council races would be helpless against them. "No," she said quietly. "I think we should open it wider." Within hours, word of the discovery reached the highest levels of government. In the emergency bunker, President Chen Wei listened to Dr. Okafor's report with growing amazement. "You're telling me there are ancient beings in the spaces between dimensions, and our technology can release them?" "That's correct, Mr. President. These entities appear to have been isolated for millions of years. They're desperate to enter our reality. Are they hostile?" Dr. Okafor paused. They're hungry, sir. They feed on energy, on life force, on the terror of living beings. They don't distinguish between humans and aliens. To them, all biological life is just food. General Martinez leaned forward. Can we control them? Control? Dr. Okafor laughed, and the sound held no humor. General, these beings make our worst nightmares look like children's stories. But here's the important part. They hate being trapped. And they're grateful to whoever sets them free. President Chen felt a chill of understanding. You're suggesting we make a deal with them. I'm suggesting we give the Galactic Council exactly what they've always said we were. A species too dangerous to be allowed freedom. The room fell silent. Around the table, the leaders of humanity looked at each other. They were talking about releasing cosmic horrors into the galaxy. Beings that would feed on terror and death without mercy or restraint. It should have been an impossible decision. But humanity had been caged for 300 years. They had been treated like animals, like monsters, like a threat that needed to be contained. If the galaxy wanted monsters, then monsters they would become. The vote was unanimous. Above them, in orbit around Earth, the Council fleet waited for humanity's surrender. They had no idea that their worst fears about the human species were about to become reality. The dimensional laboratory deep beneath Geneva hummed with energy that made the air itself feel thick and strange. Dr. Sarah Okafor stood before a machine that hadn't existed a week ago, built by human hands working faster than should have been possible. The dimensional fold generator was 3 times larger than anything they had built before, and its purpose was not exploration or transportation. It was designed to open a permanent gateway to the space between dimensions. Final systems check, Sarah called out to her team. Around her, scientists worked with the focused intensity of people who knew they were about to change the galaxy forever. Their faces showed no doubt, no fear of what they were about to unleash. Dr. James Park looked up from his console. Dimensional matrix is stable. Energy collectors are online. The greeting protocols are ready. Greeting protocols. Sarah almost smiled at the clinical term they used for their plan to communicate with beings older than stars. Through their previous contact, they had learned basic facts about the entities trapped in the dimensional spaces. They were vast. They were hungry. And they were very, very eager to escape their prison. Mr. President, Sarah spoke into her communicator. We're ready to begin. 3 levels above. President Chen Wei sat in the command center with his advisors. Through reinforced windows, they could see the laboratory below where humanity was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Dr. Okafor, Chen said. Once we do this, there's no going back. Are you certain these beings will honor our agreement? Sarah's voice came through the speakers with absolute confidence. Mr. President, these entities have been trapped for millions of years. They view us as their liberators, and unlike the Galactic Council, they don't care about our species being too dangerous. In fact, they admire danger. General Martinez leaned toward the microphone. What about control? How do we make sure they don't turn on us? We don't control them, General. We work with them. They get access to our reality and all the life energy they've been craving. We get allies who can face the Council fleet and win. Chen looked around the room at his advisors. Each face showed the same expression. Grim determination mixed with something that might have been excitement. Begin the procedure, he ordered. In the laboratory below, Sarah placed her hand on the activation switch. Around her, the dimensional fold generator began to spin up, creating energies that bent space itself. Warning lights flashed as reality began to stretch and warp around the machine. Opening dimensional gateway in 3, 2, 1. The machine activated with a sound like reality tearing. The air in the center of the laboratory simply disappeared, replaced by a hole in space that showed the region between dimensions. Through that hole, they could see the vast structures that the ancient beings called home. At first, nothing happened. Then something moved in the darkness beyond the gateway. The first entity to approach the dimensional opening was impossible to describe in human terms. It existed in more dimensions than human minds could properly understand, appearing as shifting geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, resonating in frequencies that made human bones vibrate. Small ones who open doors, the entity said, its voice like the sound of galaxies colliding. We have waited so long. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "We offer you freedom in exchange for alliance. Our enemies have trapped us just as you were trapped. Help us break free and we will keep the doors open." The entity moved closer to the gateway, and Sarah could feel its attention focusing on her like the weight of a star. Other beings gathered behind it, shapes that defied understanding, intelligence that had existed since before the first planets formed. "Your enemies become our food," the entity replied. "Their fear will be sweet nourishment. We accept this bargain, small ones." "There's one condition," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Humans are off limits. We are your allies, not your prey." The entity paused, considering. Other beings moved in the darkness behind it, alien thoughts touching the edges of human consciousness like cold fingers. "Agreed," it finally said. "Your species shows promise. You embrace necessary darkness. We will not consume those who free us." Sarah felt relief flood through her, followed immediately by horror at what they had just agreed to. They had made a pact with cosmic predators, beings that would feed on terror and life force without mercy. But the Council fleet was still waiting in space above them, ready to destroy human civilization. "How many of you are there?" she asked. "We are Legion," the entity replied. "We are the hunger between stars. We are the darkness that feeds on light. And now, thanks to you, we are free." The gateway began to widen as more entities pressed against it from the other side. Sarah realized that what they had thought was a small opening was actually expanding rapidly, becoming a permanent rift in reality. "Dr. Okafor," Dr. Park called out from his station. "The gateway is growing on its own. It's feeding off the dimensional energy in our system." Sarah looked at the readings and felt her blood run cold. The rift was already large enough for massive objects to pass through, and on the other side, she could see vast shapes moving in the darkness, beings the size of space stations preparing to enter their reality. "Mr. President," she called into her communicator, "you need to contact Admiral Chen immediately. Tell her to prepare the fleet for immediate deployment." "Why?" came Chen's voice, tight with concern. "Because our new allies are coming through now, and the Council fleet is about to discover what a real threat looks like." In the space above Earth, Council sensors detected the dimensional anomaly immediately. Ambassador Zethka stood on the bridge of the Divine Authority, studying the readings with growing alarm. "What is that energy signature?" he demanded. His science officer, a nervous creature from the Varian species, checked the sensors 3 times before answering. "Sir, it appears to be a massive dimensional rift opening in the space near Earth. The energy readings are unprecedented." Zethka felt his 4 hearts begin to beat faster. Dimensional rifts were theoretical constructs, impossibly dangerous experiments that no civilized species would attempt. Are the humans responsible for this? "Unknown, sir. But the rift is expanding rapidly, and there are movement signatures on the other side." Before Zethka could respond, something emerged from the rift. The entity that entered normal space was beyond the understanding of Council science. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, appearing as a writhing mass of impossible geometry that changed shape constantly. When Council sensors tried to scan it, the instruments overloaded and shut down. Behind the first entity came others, dozens, then hundreds of beings that had no right to exist in a rational universe. They moved through space as if it were water, unbound by the physical laws that governed normal matter. On every Council ship, alien crew members felt a primal terror that went deeper than instinct. They were looking at predators from the dark spaces between realities, ancient beings that viewed all biological life as food. "Sir," the Varian science officer screamed, his voice breaking with fear. "More rifts are opening. They're appearing all around our fleet." Zethka watched in horror as dimensional tiers opened in space throughout the system. From each rift came more entities, beings of such alien malevolence that his mind refused to fully process what he was seeing. And then, emerging from the largest rift near Earth came the human fleet. The ships that appeared were unlike anything in Council records. They moved with impossible grace, their hulls covered in patterns that seemed to shift and writhe. The vessels themselves appeared to exist partially in normal space and partially in the dimensional realm, flickering in and out of reality. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Prometheus, watching the Council fleet through sensors that could see across multiple dimensions. Her ship was no longer purely human technology. Working with the entities from between dimensions, human engineers had created vessels that combined the best of both realities. "Open a channel to the Council fleet," she ordered. Her image appeared on screens throughout the Council ships, but something was wrong with the transmission. Her face seemed to flicker between human features and something else, something that suggested she had been changed by contact with the dimensional beings. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Hegemony," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made alien listeners feel deep instinctive fear. "You came here to demonstrate your power over humanity. Instead, you're about to learn why we were quarantined." Around the Council fleet, the dimensional entities began to move closer. Their alien thoughts pressed against the minds of the Council crews, filling them with visions of cosmic horror and inevitable doom. "You wanted to see what happens when humanity stops pretending to be civilized," Admiral Chen continued. "Congratulations. You're about to witness the birth of the galaxy's new apex predators." Zethka tried to respond but found that his voice had deserted him. Around his ship, creatures from humanity's nightmares circled like sharks, waiting for the signal to feed. The Council had crossed the frontier. Now they would learn why it had been built to keep humanity in, not others out. The battle for the Sol system began when Ambassador Zethka made the worst decision of his long life. Standing on the bridge of the Divine Authority, surrounded by readings that made no sense and sensor data that showed impossible things moving through space around his fleet, Zethka refused to accept what he was seeing. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had superior technology, superior numbers, and superior firepower. A species of primitives trapped in one star system could not threaten them. "All ships," he commanded, his voice carrying across the communication channels to 2,000 Council warships. "Open fire on the human vessels. Destroy them all." It was the last order he would ever give. The Council fleet opened fire with weapons that could crack planets, energy beams hot enough to melt asteroids, missiles that could penetrate any known armor, and gravity weapons that could crush matter into neutron-dense particles, all focused on the human ships emerging from the dimensional rifts. The attacks passed through the human vessels like light through glass. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the Council weapons fire harmlessly around her ship. The dimensional entities had taught human scientists things about reality that the Council had never discovered. Her vessels existed in multiple dimensions at once, present in normal space but able to shift into the areas between realities when attacked. "Phase shift complete," reported her weapons officer, Lieutenant Commander Park. "All ships are in dimensional overlap mode." "Good," Sarah replied. "Now show them what human creativity looks like when we stop following the rules." The Prometheus and the ships around it suddenly became solid again, but now they were inside the defensive formations of the Council fleet. The dimensional fold drives hadn't just hidden them. They had moved them through impossible space to appear wherever they wanted. "Fire," Admiral Chen ordered. The weapons that unleashed from the human ships were things that should not have existed. Bullets made of crystallized space-time that ignored physical armor and tore holes in reality itself. Energy beams that burned with the cold fire of the spaces between dimensions. Gravity bombs that created localized tears in the fabric of existence. The Council ship Eternal Glory simply vanished when a reality-warping torpedo struck its hull. Not destroyed, not exploded. Erased from existence as if it had never been built. The Righteous Purpose found itself filled with geometric shapes that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Alien forms that drove the crew insane just by being perceived. The ship's crew began screaming and didn't stop until their voices gave out. The Divine Will experienced something worse. A dimensional entity phased through its hull and began feeding directly on the life force of everyone aboard. The aliens aged decades in seconds, their energy being consumed by something that had been hungry for millions of years. But the true horror began when the dimensional entities themselves joined the battle. The beings from between dimensions moved through space like living nightmares. They had no ships, no technology as the Council understood it. They were themselves weapons of destruction that operated by rules the Council's science couldn't comprehend. One entity, a writhing mass of impossible angles that hurt to look at directly, approached the Council battleship Galactic Peace. The ship's crew opened fire with everything they had, but the weapons passed through the creature without effect. The entity reached out with appendages that existed in 7 dimensions and touched the ship's hull. Reality warped around the contact point, and suddenly the galactic piece was no longer a single object. It existed in thousands of different states simultaneously, phasing rapidly between being intact, being destroyed, being under construction, and being nothing but scattered atoms. The crew experienced all of these states at once. Their screams could be heard across the communication channels until the ship finally settled into the destroyed state and fell silent. On the bridge of the Divine Authority, Ambassador Zethka watched his fleet being systematically annihilated by enemies that shouldn't exist. His proud warships, the finest vessels in the galaxy, were being destroyed by weapons that ignored every law of physics he understood. "Sir," his communications officer called out, terror making his voice crack. "We're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships. They're asking permission to retreat." Zethka felt something break inside his mind. The Council didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They were the masters of the galaxy, the bringers of order and civilization. "No retreat," he screamed. "All ships continue firing. We will not be defeated by primitives and their pet monsters." But even as he gave the order, another dimensional rift opened directly in front of his ship. Something emerged from it that was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that his mind simply refused to process what he was seeing. The entity spoke, and its voice came from inside his head rather than through his ears. "Small frightened thing," it said, each word like ice forming in his brain. "Your species has ruled through fear. Now learn what true fear feels like." Zethka tried to scream, but found that he had forgotten how. The battle lasted exactly 6 minutes and 37 seconds. When it ended, the Council fleet was gone. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but removed from reality in ways that defied description. Some ships had been erased from existence. Others had been folded into dimensions where they would drift forever, their crews trapped in spaces that had no connection to the normal universe. A few had simply been consumed, their matter and energy feeding beings that had been hungry since before stars learned to shine. Only one Council ship remained, the Divine Authority. Admiral Sarah Shen materialized on its bridge through a dimensional fold, appearing next to Ambassador Zethka's command chair like a ghost stepping through a wall. The alien ambassador looked up at her with eyes that no longer held sanity. "Hello, Zethka," she said pleasantly. "I have a message for you to take back to the Council." The ambassador's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Sarah gestured, and one of the dimensional entities flowed through the bridge walls. Its presence filled the air with the smell of deep space and the sensation of falling through infinite darkness. "This is my friend," Sarah explained. "It's very old, very hungry, and very grateful to humanity for setting it free. It wants to meet more of your people." She leaned down close to Zethka, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that existed in multiple dimensions. "You spent 3 centuries telling the galaxy that humans were too dangerous to be free, that we were monsters who would destroy civilized society if we were allowed to spread across the stars." She smiled, and the expression was entirely human and utterly terrifying. "You were right," Sarah gestured again, and the dimensional entity withdrew slightly. Zethka found that he could speak, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. What are you?" "We're what you made us," Sarah replied. "You wanted to contain the monster, so we became the monster. You wanted to cage the dangerous species, so we embraced being dangerous. For 300 years, you treated us like the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen." She stood up, her image flickering slightly as she prepared to fold back into dimensional space. "Now we're going to live up to your expectations." The dimensional entity moved closer to Zethka, and the ambassador felt alien thoughts pressing against his mind. Images of cosmic horror, visions of civilizations being consumed by beings from the dark spaces between realities, and the absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. "Take your ship," Sarah said as she began to fade from normal space. "Go back to the Council. Tell them that humanity sends its regards. Tell them that the frontier no longer exists. Tell them that we're coming." She paused at the edge of visibility. "And tell them that we're bringing friends." Admiral Chen vanished, leaving Ambassador Zethka alone on the bridge of the last Council ship in the Sol system. Around him, his crew sat in shocked silence, their minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. The Divine Authority turned and fled toward the edge of the system, its engines pushed beyond their safety limits in the desperate need to escape. Behind them, the dimensional rifts continued to expand, pouring more entities into normal space. The entities that had been trapped between dimensions for millions of years were finally free, and they were very, very hungry. In the space around Earth, the human fleet regrouped. Their ships flickered in and out of normal reality, as the crews celebrated their victory with emotions that no longer felt entirely human. The cage was broken, the frontier was gone, and somewhere, in the dark spaces between dimensions, ancient beings that humanity had awakened were already planning their first meal. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was no longer recognizable. The Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall on the capital world of Nexus Prime had once been a symbol of order and civilization. The massive building had hosted 10,000 years of peaceful negotiations between species, where conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than warfare. Now it floated in the empty vacuum of space, kept habitable by human technology that bent reality to human will. Dr. Sarah Okafor stood at the center of what had once been the Council's most sacred chamber. The building around her existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its walls showing glimpses of the spaces between realities where her new allies dwelt. The sight would have driven most Council species insane, but Sarah found it beautiful. She was no longer entirely human. The months of working closely with the dimensional entities had changed her in ways that went deeper than flesh and bone. Her thoughts now operated on multiple levels of reality. Her perception extended into dimensions that had no names in human language. When she moved, space itself seemed to bend around her, as if the universe was eager to accommodate her presence. Around the chamber, representatives of what had once been the mighty Galactic Council knelt in submission. The proud alien races that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were now tributary states, their civilizations reduced to sources of resources and entertainment for their new human masters. Ambassador Zeth Ka was among them, though he was barely recognizable as the arrogant official who had delivered the Council's ultimatum 6 months ago. His encounter with the dimensional entities had left marks that went beyond physical scars. His 4 eyes now held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much of the universe's true nature. "You wanted to speak about surrender terms," Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the assembled aliens shiver with instinctive fear. "I'm curious what you think you have to negotiate with." Zethka struggled to his feet, his movements shaky and uncertain. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Please," he said, the word carrying the weight of absolute desperation. "My people, the hegemony worlds. There are billions of civilians. They had nothing to do with the quarantine. They're just ordinary citizens trying to live their lives." Sarah tilted her head, studying the broken ambassador with something that might have been curiosity. Behind her, reality flickered as one of her dimensional allies moved through the chamber. The entity was invisible to normal perception, but its presence made the air taste of copper and starlight. "Ordinary citizens," she repeated. "Tell me, Zethka, how many ordinary human citizens spent their entire lives trapped in one star system because your people decided we were too dangerous to be free?" "That was different," Zethka protested weakly. "Humans were. You were unpredictable, violent. The quarantine was for the safety of the galaxy." Sarah laughed, and the sound carried echoes from dimensions where laughter had different meanings. "And now the galaxy is safe," she said. "Safe under human protection. Safe under human rule. Isn't that what you wanted? Order and stability?" President Chenwei materialized beside her through a dimensional fold, though the man who appeared was barely recognizable as the politician who had once advocated for peaceful coexistence. His transformation had been even more dramatic than Sarah's. Where she had gained new perceptions and abilities, Chen had become something that existed partially outside normal reality. He still called himself president, but the title was meaningless now. He was emperor of the human domains, ruler of an empire that stretched across 1,000 star systems and continued to grow every day. "Status report," he said, his words causing small ripples in the fabric of space itself. "The final Varian resistance cell was eliminated yesterday," Sarah reported. "The Altarian Federation has agreed to our terms. The remaining Council species have all submitted formal surrender documents." Chen nodded, his attention turning to the kneeling aliens. When he looked at them, some began to weep, though whether from fear or relief was impossible to tell. You're wondering what happens now, he said to them. You're hoping that human mercy will be different from human justice. You're praying that we'll be better masters than you were. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. You're going to be disappointed. The chamber fell silent except for the soft sound of alien breathing and the barely audible whispers of dimensional entities moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. The frontier that kept us trapped for 3 centuries taught us valuable lessons, Chen continued. It taught us that the strong make the rules. It taught us that the weak exist only at the mercy of their betters. Most importantly, it taught us that there's no such thing as justice in the universe, only power. He gestured, and the walls of the chamber became transparent, showing the space around them. Floating in the darkness were the remnants of the Council fleet, ships that had been transformed by dimensional technology into monuments to human victory. Some of the vessels existed in impossible configurations, twisted through dimensions that allowed them to be larger inside than outside. Others flickered between states of existence, serving as homes for the entities that had become humanity's allies. Your species ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, Chen said. You brought order to chaos, civilization to primitive worlds, peace to warring races. You created a golden age that spanned hundreds of star systems. The aliens looked up at him with something that might have been hope. And then you made the mistake of caging humanity. The hope died. Now we rule, Chen continued. And unlike you, we don't pretend that our rule is for the greater good. We don't claim that we're bringing civilization to the galaxy. We rule because we can, because we have the power to do so, and because it pleases us. Sarah stepped forward, her form flickering slightly as she moved between dimensions. Your species will serve, she said. Your worlds will provide resources. Your people will work to support the expansion of human dominion across the galaxy. In return, we will allow you to continue existing. That's slavery, whispered one of the alien representatives, a Centauri female whose species had once been known for their diplomatic skills. Yes, Sarah replied simply. It is, but why? Zethka asked, his voice breaking. You have won. You have proven your superiority. Why not rule with mercy? Why not show that humans can be better than the Council was? Chen and Sarah looked at each other, and something passed between them that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. When Chen turned back to the aliens, his expression held no warmth, no compassion, no hint of the politician he had once been. Because, he said, you spent 300 years telling the galaxy that humanity was a species of monsters. You convinced yourselves that we were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed freedom. He leaned forward, and the space around him seemed to darken. You were right. In the depths of space around the floating chamber, more dimensional rifts opened. From them emerged entities that had never been seen in normal reality before, beings that the dimensional allies had summoned from even deeper layers of existence. These new arrivals were hungrier than the first group, more alien, more eager to feed on the terror and life force of biological creatures. The galaxy wanted monsters, Sarah said, watching with satisfaction as the assembled aliens recoiled from the sight of the new arrivals. So we became monsters. The galaxy wanted us to be dangerous beyond measure, so we embraced danger beyond measure. The frontier that trapped us is gone, Chen added. In its place, we've built something better. An empire where human will is the only law, where human desire is the only morality, where human power is the only truth that matters. He stood up, his form beginning to fade as he prepared to fold back into dimensional space. Welcome to the new galactic order, he said. Try not to disappoint us the way you disappointed yourselves. Chen vanished, leaving Sarah alone with the conquered representatives of the former Galactic Council. She looked at them for a long moment, these beings who had once considered themselves the masters of civilization. You have questions, she said. Zethka raised his head slightly. Will you at least spare the children? The innocents who had nothing to do with the quarantine? Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the scientist she had once been. The children will grow up in a universe where humanity is the dominant species, she said. They'll learn to serve from birth and they'll never know any other way. In a sense, they'll be happier than you are. And the rest of us? You'll work until you die, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Your species will provide labor and resources for human expansion. Your worlds will become factories and farms to support our empire. Your greatest minds will serve human science and human industry. She paused, considering. And when you die, your life force will feed our allies from the spaces between dimensions. Nothing will be wasted. The chamber fell silent again. In the darkness outside, the dimensional entities moved through space like living nightmares. Ancient beings that had found in humanity something they had never encountered before. A species willing to sacrifice its own conscience for survival. Sarah began to fade from normal space, preparing to return to her laboratories where human scientists worked with cosmic horrors to